It's officially fantasy football draft season. Although for some of us, we've been drafting for a while. That's right, doing best ball drafts, dynasty leagues, and just drafting way too early. So you want to know which wide receivers we can't get enough of? We're going to give you 6 names.
If you can't wait to start drafting fantasy football teams, you don't have to. Underdog Fantasy has drafts going on all offseason with tons of unique and fun formats. Not to mention their flagship Best Ball Mania 5, where one lucky winner will become a millionaire. Plus, they already have pick'em lines ready for week 1 of the NFL season and their new streak format where you can win 1,000 times your entry. Just go to UnderdogFantasy.com and sign up using promo code ENDGAME to get a special pick'em that you can't get anywhere else, plus up to $250 in bonus cash.
All right, Chris, start off. Who's a receiver you find on your teams over and over again?
Well, when I looked at my underdog exposure, my most drafted wide receivers, Hollywood Brown was number 1. And in fact, I took him on Sunday. And if you recall, that was after he suffered his injury. That's right. I am willing to buy any injury dip here on Hollywood Brown. It's a shoulder injury. It's not a knee. It's not an ankle. It's not the type of thing that should affect him throughout the course of the season. This exact same injury happened to Tyreek Hill in 2019. He missed 4 games, came back, and he was fine. I think Hollywood Brown is going to come back and be just fine. And look, there's a chance, albeit small, but a chance that he doesn't miss a single game. But even if he misses week 1, even if he misses week 2, it's okay. Buy the dip on Hollywood Brown because we're talking about a wide receiver that's going to be in one of the best passing offenses in the NFL, one of the best offenses in the NFL. And all reports, everything we've heard out of training camp so far is how good Hollywood Brown looks. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid raving about Hollywood Brown, how quickly he's picking up the offense. Look, you don't need Hollywood Brown in weeks 1 or 2. Nobody wins a fantasy championship in the first 2 weeks. When it matters most, down the stretch, in the second half, in the fantasy playoffs, Hollywood Brown will be 100% good to go in one of the best offenses with the best QB in the entire league. So buy any injury dip you get on Hollywood Brown. I am going to continue to buy any injury dips on Hollywood Brown. He's a guy that was going, even before the injury, like 5th, 6th rounds. If you can get him later than that, absolutely do it. You'll probably have 2 or 3 other wide receivers that can carry you in the meantime while you wait for him. So I am not scared of the injury at all. I will continue to draft Hollywood Brown as much as I have before the injury.
Well, I checked my exposure for best ball leagues on Underdog, things like Best Ball Mania. All together, all the drafts I've done, my number 1 receiver is Michael Pittman Jr. And let me tell you why. You might think, well, that's really going to be a league-winning pick. Is that the upside you talk about? Michael Pittman has been really solid in fantasy the last couple of years, but it just doesn't scream ceiling, right? He's not a guy who gets those 80-yard touchdown plays, not someone who you feel is going to lead the league in receiving. Maybe he won't. But let's look at the team context. So first of all, I firmly believe that the Colts will be one of the best offenses in the league right now. But you also have to look at the fact that Pittman, it's pretty impressive what he's done the last couple of seasons. If you really stop and think about the state of the Indianapolis Colts quarterback room over the last couple of years, basically Michael Pittman's NFL career. So last year, of course, promising rookie Anthony Richardson out early in the season, and it was Gardner Minshew, who is a backup, right? That's what he is. That's what he should be, a backup quarterback. Remember the year before that, what happened? We had the shell of Matt Ryan for most of the season. Yeah, that happened. And that's what Pittman had to deal with. Before that, it was Carson Wentz. That's right. We don't even remember these things. We've blocked them from our memories because that's what has happened in Indy. And now Anthony Richardson hopefully is good to go for the course of the season. Coach Shane Steichen, offensive genius. He managed to get this to be a top 10 offense despite that quarterback situation, despite Jonathan Taylor missing all these games. And Michael Pittman is still going to be a target hog there. Look, talk about injury dip. Josh Downs, unfortunately, suffered an injury early in the preseason. He shouldn't be out too long. And so I will gladly buy the dip on him because he's still a great late round target. But this just makes it so even more important for Michael Pittman to be that alpha. And he will, because other than that, you got a rookie in A.D. Mitchell, a guy in Alec Pierce who runs a lot of routes and never really gets targeted. Pittman is going to be the everything for this passing offense. And it's really amazing that despite the fact that he is a big receiver at 6'4", 223, he's only had 4 touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons. And that's despite the fact that he's been 11th, just outside the top 10 in red zone targets last year and in team percentage of red zone targets. He's getting the targets, he's getting the usage. He just needs the quarterback to be there. So this could be Michael Pittman's best season, and I'm just going to keep going back to him early in drafts. All right, how about another veteran who could actually take another step up this year?
Yeah, my second most drafted wide receiver is Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've talked about him a bunch this offseason. You look at Chris Godwin from 2019 until 2022, he had played over 50% of his snaps every single one of those years in the slot. Last year, that dropped to 32%. This is big because Chris Godwin is a player who's going to excel out of the slot. He's a big slot wide receiver. He gets huge mismatches out of the slot. And already OC Liam Cohen and head coach Todd Bowles saying we got to get Chris Godwin back into the slot. So I think we're going to see him go over 50% of snaps in the slot again like we did in the past. You look at it last year, had 131 targets, had a higher target share than he had the year before with Tom Brady, so he was still heavily involved in this offense. Of course, Mike Evans overshadowed him because of all the big plays and the touchdowns. But with Chris Godwin back in the slot, it wouldn't surprise me if Chris Godwin was the better receiver this year between the two guys. You look at those years I talked about from 2019 up until the year he tore his ACL, he averaged 19 points per game, 16 points per game, and 17 points per game. I think he can get back to those levels, maybe even exceed those levels. And based on the fact that you get this guy a lot of times 6th, 7th round of your fantasy drafts, that's absolutely going to be a massive pick for your fantasy team. So I keep grabbing him over and over again in Underdog. I think you should definitely grab him in your fantasy leagues.
Well, my number 2 most drafted receiver, really not going to shock anybody here. It's George Pickens. So let me explain again why I am still all in on him. So first, we have to actually address the elephant that's still somehow in the social media atmosphere. Brandon Ayuk, is he going to Pittsburgh? It doesn't seem like it. I mean, if this was going to happen, it would have happened, right? I'm not worried about that. And in fact, nobody has gone to Pittsburgh to help be that number 2 receiver. And the guy who maybe would have filled that void, rookie Roman Wilson, who they drafted, he's hurt already. And it's not like he was a lock anyway. So we're looking at Calvin Austin, doesn't really scream wide receiver 2 on an NFL team. No offense. And Van Jefferson, who you may not have known was still in the league. I mean, come on. Pickens, he's not the kind of guy you envision as, let's say, a target hog because he's more of a big play receiver. He's going to have to be a target hog in this offense. And why not? I mean, think about it. The fact that last year, even with Deontay Johnson there, Deontay Johnson, really good receiver, a veteran receiver, someone who gets a lot of those short intermediate passes, George Pickens was still targeted 106 times. He's going to get more targets this year just out of sheer necessity. And look, he also has that big play, big game ability, which you clearly know. If you had Pickens in your fantasy playoffs last year, you were doing backflips. You don't care what happened before week 12. It didn't matter. He made up for it and more than made up for it. He averaged 18.1 yards per catch, a league high. Now, let's also think about the fact he did this with Mason Rudolph. And before that, Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky. No matter what you think about Russ Wilson or Justin Fields, both those guys are upgrades over all 3 of those other guys. So just out of default, this is going to be a better passing offense. And the Steelers don't have to have one of the most high-scoring offenses. It's not, I'm a big believer here in Pittsburgh overall. I'm a believer in George Pickens, that he can thrive in spite of the circumstances.
Do you want to win your fantasy league but don't have time to do all the research? Are you tired of drafting mediocre teams and then having to constantly hope you hit it big on the waiver wire just to compete? Do you wish you could have a fantasy expert like Pierre or myself with you while you draft? Well, now you can. With our app Draft Lane and our live draft pilot, we will guide you through every pick of your draft and tell you exactly which players we would pick if we were on the clock. Our proprietary algorithm will take into account your league settings, scoring, and roster requirements to identify the best picks every time you are on the clock to ensure you have a winning team from week 1. It's the closest thing you can get to having us there drafting with you. Get the biggest edge in fantasy football. Just go to your app store and search for Draft Lane and download it today and get ready to dominate your draft.
All right, let's get to number 3 for each of us, and some of these names might surprise y'all.
Yeah, this one actually surprised me when I looked, but I knew I've drafted a lot of Darnell Mooney because I do like the value on Darnell Mooney this year, but I didn't realize he was going to be my number 3 drafted wide receiver, but I'm not mad about it at all because, again, this is a guy, a complete afterthought in drafts. You get him very, very late in your drafts, but Darnell Mooney has a chance to be one of these kind of sneaky upside wide receiver 3 flex plays for your fantasy teams. Let's not forget, in year 2 in Chicago, he had 81 catches and over 1,000 yards. Now, sure, last 2 years, been disappointing, but now he's going to get this Falcons offense with the passing coordinator from the Rams from last year as the offensive coordinator. You know they're going to take shots down the field. He's got Kirk Cousins here. And look, the only other wide receiver the Falcons brought in this year to help out the offense, Rondell Moore, sadly, already out for the season with a leg injury. So Darnell Mooney, even though I already thought he was going to be the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, is now clearly the number 2 wide receiver in this offense. Now, I'll be honest here, in your regular, redraft fantasy league, he's probably not going to be a guy you're going to want in your lineup every single week, but he's the kind of late round wide receiver I love to draft because he's one of those guys that if he's got a good matchup this week, or if you just need a flex with upside, or you have bye weeks and you're like, I'm just looking for upside, he will have it. He'll be one of those guys. Yeah, he'll probably be a little boom bust, but he'll have plenty of boom weeks this year. So Darnell Mooney, look for him very late in your fantasy drafts. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. Hopefully I'm right because I got a lot of them on Underdog.
Well, my number 3 most drafted receiver is a player who I know barely misses a cut for you. He's also one of your most drafted receivers, one of our favorite late round targets, especially in Underdog for best ball. It's Demarcus Robinson of the Rams. Now, I know what you're thinking. The number 3 receiver on his own offense, how can he really be on your roster so many times? What's the upside? Well, I think the obvious answer is if we see what happened last year with Cooper Kupp out, we're going to see what happened last year with Demarcus Robinson on a bigger scale, meaning he's going to be someone you want to plug and play and start every single week. And yes, it's all about upside. I don't consider him really a handcuff, though, to Kupp because he will have some standalone value. The Rams are an offense that does throw the ball quite a bit. And remember, they're a top 10 scoring offense. If you're going to take a late round flyer on a receiver, you're going to want somebody who either you expect to get a ton of targets because he's one of the primary focal points of that offense, or just somebody in a good team, a good offense, right? You'd rather take the number 3, 4, 5 receiver on a team like the Chiefs as opposed to whoever is the number 2 receiver for the Jets these days, I'm assuming. So Robinson fits that bill. He's got so much upside if either Kupp or Puka Nacua go down. And he was actually really effective down the stretch. You might remember that late season surge. Yes, because of injuries, but still, he caught 29 targets from weeks 14 through 17, coincidentally, the fantasy football playoffs, in a 4-week stretch. Almost 30 targets, 17 catches, and a little bit surprising here, he was targeted heavily in the red zone. He caught 3 touchdowns, and he was targeted a whole lot more in near the goal line. So this guy who has scoring upside, and that counts for something too. It's hard to believe that even though he's not going to necessarily be up there on draft boards, somebody who you want to target. Wide receiver 74, he's going at pick 169 on Underdog. That feels way too late for a player with this much upside in an offense like the Rams. We just keep drafting those receivers because we feel they are ready to bust out this season. Speaking of which, you want to know more breakout players who could dominate in fantasy this season? Got 10 of them for you right here.